Good evening and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Jack Bradley filling in here for Steve Lance. Here's what's coming up. Hitting the ground running, Vice President Kamala Harris rallying voters in Wisconsin and Michigan with her new VP pick, Governor Tim Walz. But Senator J.D. Vance, holding dueling events in the same cities, challenges Harris by walking up to her plane. Turkey seeks to join an international lawsuit against Israel, and Hamas announces a new leader. We'll tell you how countries are reacting. Vice President Kamala Harris takes her new running mate, Governor Tim Walz, to the battleground states of Wisconsin and Michigan. But Trump's VP pick, Senator J.D. Vance, shows up in the exact same cities to ramp up his counter-messaging. Now, NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more on this.
In their first full day as running mates, Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz campaigning in Wisconsin and later in Michigan.
And in 90 days, the nation will know Coach Walz by a new title, Vice President.
Walz, who's just tabbed as Harris's VP pick the day before, continues to highlight his background as a veteran.
For 24 years, I proudly wore the uniform of this nation.
But former President Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, traveled to the same exact cities where Harris and Walz are campaigning. Vance criticizing what he calls open border policies.
And I heard just earlier about a criminal who was deported from this community who came back in and then raped an 11-year-old girl.
And responding to the attack line, calling him weird.
Look, I've got my wife here. I've got 3 beautiful kids at home. I'm a normal guy who wants to live the American dream and wants all of you and your kids to be able to live the American dream. If those people want to call me weird, I think it's a badge of honor.
Earlier today, Vance landed in Wisconsin just minutes after Harris touched down at the same airport. Vance walked to Air Force Two, then told reporters,
I just wanted to check out my future plane.
The Harris campaign on Wednesday said it had raised $36 million since announcing Walz as the VP pick. According to a new memo, the campaign will focus on the so-called blue wall states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and use Walz as a key asset in appealing to rural voters. But Harris and Walz's battleground state blitz this week is cut short by Tropical Storm Debby. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
Well, not a dry day on the campaign trail. And Congresswoman Cori Bush, member of the so-called squad, will not be on the ballot in November. That's after losing in Missouri's Democratic primary. One analysis said that this was the second most expensive primary race in history. NTD's Jason Blair reports.
St. Louis prosecutor Wesley Bell beat Representative Cori Bush with 51% of the vote in a charged Democratic primary in Missouri on Tuesday. Bell said in a statement, quote, "This victory belongs to every volunteer, every supporter, every voter who believes in our vision of a better future." AIPAC posted on X that they and their 4.5 million grassroots members were proud to help pro-Israel leader Wesley Bell defeat Cori Bush. Bush has been an outspoken critic of Israel during the current Israel-Hamas conflict. Bush said in her concession speech, "Now I don't have to worry about some strings I have attached, that as much as I love my job, but all they did was radicalize me, so now they need to be afraid." Ad Impact said it was the most expensive primary ever, with more than $18.2 million spent on political advertising. The most expensive, according to Ad Impact, was $25.4 million. That was in this year's Democratic primary race in New York, in which squad member Jamal Bowman was defeated by Westchester County Executive George Latimer. Some other highlights from Tuesday's primaries include Trump-endorsed Jared Sessler leading in Washington's Republican race at 30%, with about 60% of the count in so far. Dan Newhouse is currently second in that race with 25%. Newhouse is one of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach former President Trump. And in Michigan, it looks like Elisa Slotkin will be the candidate to replace retiring Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow, leading with 76% of the vote, with 92% counted so far. Reporting in Capitol Hill, Jason Blair, NTD News.
Turning our attention now to the Middle East, Hamas has named Yahya Sinwar as its new political leader, and Turkey is seeking to join South Africa's lawsuit against Israel. NTD's Fiona G has the latest updates and what they mean for the region.
Turkey has requested to join South Africa's lawsuit against Israel in the International Court of Justice. The lawsuit accuses Israel of genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Turkey is the latest nation seeking to join the lawsuit, behind Spain, Mexico, Colombia, Nicaragua, Libya, and Palestinian officials. It is now waiting for the court's approval. Turkey's leadership has been an outspoken critic against Israel's war in Gaza. Meanwhile, reactions to Yahya Sinwar's appointment as the new Hamas leader continue. On Wednesday, White House National Security Advisor John Kirby said, quote, "The man is a terrorist. He has an awful lot of blood on his hands. This guy was the architect of the 7th of October attacks in Israel, and some of that blood on his hands is American blood." A spokesperson for the State Department said Sinwar has always called the shots for Hamas, even before the death of former leader Ismail Haniyeh.
Ultimately, it was Sinwar that had the final decision-making authority, as we could see throughout these negotiations, on whether to accept a ceasefire or not. So yes, Sinwar absolutely ought to be brought to justice. We believe that for his significant acts of terrorism. And we also think he ought to accept the ceasefire deal.
The Israeli military's chief of staff called Sinwar a murderer and said that Israel is ready to hurt its attackers. The new Hamas leader is at the top of Israel's kill list. Some Gaza residents are also disheartened by the news. Speaking to CNN, they say there has been too much death and they just want the war to end. Others rejoiced at the news. In Yemen, university students rallied in support of Sinwar. Iran and the Hezbollah terrorist group congratulated Hamas and Sinwar. Experts say Sinwar is more extreme than his predecessor, and his appointment could point Hamas to a more hardline stance. Fiona G, NTD News.
The U.S. is continuing to move military assets across the Middle East to help defend Israel. The Pentagon saying it's making sure it can respond to a range of contingencies. Now, with the appointment of Hamas's new leader, will this heighten tensions in the Middle East? We're joined by Foreign Policy Director at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, Jonathan Ruhi. Jonathan Ruhi, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, the terrorist group Hamas has just reportedly named Yahya Sinwar, who is the mastermind of the brutal October 7th attack on Israel, as its leader to succeed its former political chief. Does this heighten tensions in Israel and in the Hamas war?
So I think the tensions are already high enough. It's hard to imagine how they'll go any higher. And, you know, with the killing of Haniyeh in Tehran, people are wondering what this means for Hamas's outlook toward ceasefire talks and also a continuation of the war. And I think that's actually one of the few things that does not change and does not set off a cascade in the region. I think Hamas will continue to have its heels dug in the ceasefire talks.
Right. So the Secretary of State Antony Blinken told reporters on Tuesday that Sinwar would have the final say in deciding whether Hamas would accept a hostage and ceasefire deal. We heard from the spokesperson of the State Department that, there's just certain things that Hamas has not agreed to that Israel has proposed in the ceasefire deal. Does Sinwar's appointment make these negotiations and an end goal here less likely?
I certainly think that's a fair assessment, although I would caution people against putting too much faith in what Secretary Blinken has said, that we were on the edge of securing a ceasefire. I think for months now, the basic negotiating position of Hamas has been that we will not take yes for an answer, and that the longer we can drag out the talks, the more the international pressure, including from the United States, will build on Israel to eventually stop its operations or do something that comes short of its stated goal of eliminating Hamas. So I think that basically stays the same.
Just on that point, the Times of Israel is reporting that Israel's military chief of staff, he says that Israel's on high alert and will be able to launch a quick attack in response to anyone who attacks them. At the same time, like you said, the U.S. is it's moving military assets into the Middle East right now, more and more so as the days go on. So considering all of this, where do you think the U.S. stands on this?
So I think we can take statements from the Biden administration at face value that their overarching desire is to avoid any escalation at this point, and at the same time, they are making a very strong and explicit commitment to help defend Israel against whatever may happen. So I think I haven't seen much evidence that they've thought very far beyond that. I think they're in crisis management mode, which, as we've seen repeatedly since October 7th, means conveying to allies and adversaries alike an overarching U.S. desire to avoid any escalation, which, while that certainly could be an admirable goal and a logical one, it becomes counterproductive when you advertise it explicitly to Iran, because they tend to see that as a green light, especially if, when we do so, it plays up differences between our approach and Israel's. As we like to say at JINSA, the more daylight there is between the U.S. and Israel, the more aggressive Iran and Hezbollah and other proxies feel they can be.
Now, up to this point with Haniya's assassination, Israel hasn't made much of a comment here. Is there a strategic reason for that?
It's a good question, especially because they were much more explicit about their killing of Fuad Shukr, the Hezbollah military operative in Beirut. And I still go back and forth on this. The most logical thing, I think, is what Israel has done in past situations where they've conducted military action but avoided taking any explicit responsibility for it, which is to minimize the pressure that their adversaries feel to have to respond. I certainly think that could be a part of it. And also, I think avoiding taking explicit responsibility also puts less pressure on us. It makes it easier for the United States to be seen to stand by the Israelis. But again, Israel has a very long and by and large successful history of conducting operations that end up being the worst kept secret in the Middle East.
And I just want to get your take on the death of Haniya. Back when that happened, there were some leaders of some authoritarian regimes like China, Russia, coming out and condemning the death of Haniya. And I just want to hear your take on that.
Yeah, sadly, that's not surprising to hear that. I think since October 7th, Russia especially, but even China, have really leaned in to their support for Iran and indirectly Iran's proxies as part of a larger, increasing tightening of relationships between Russia, China, and Iran to counterbalance the United States and our adversaries, not just in the Middle East, but also in Europe and Asia. And so, even just now we're seeing reports that, Russian defense officials have visited Tehran to help boost Iran's defenses for whatever may come next. And, 5, even 10 years ago, the United States and others were able to successfully pressure Russia against doing things like that. But, I think that cat is out of the bag now. And I expect the tighter tensions go in the Middle East, the more we'll see Iran look to support and probably receive it from Russia, China, North Korea, and potentially others.
Hey, well, Jonathan Ruhi, thank you very much for your insight here today.
Thank you so much for having me. My pleasure.
Google is found to be a monopolist by a federal judge in a landmark decision handed down on Monday. California criminal defense attorney and author Joseph Tully is here to tell us what it means for you, the consumer, and other ongoing antitrust cases. Nearly 300 aftershocks have been reported following a 5.2 magnitude earthquake in Southern California. Meanwhile, deadly Tropical Storm Debby continues to drench the East Coast. That and more when we return.